Hello, I'm Rob Morosco. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch or listen to this message. One of our strategic imperatives at Brookfield Lutheran Church is to create a digital environment that makes it easier for people to connect. Making these messages available to you is part of that imperative so that you can connect to the Word of God and then apply it to your life. Now, let me be clear. Watching these messages is not intended to be a replacement for a connection to a local Christian congregation. Being discipled by, worshiping with, caring for, being cared for by, and joining other followers of Jesus on mission is what God intends. If you are already part of a local faithful congregation, then wonderful. But if not, we would love to have you join us at Brookfield Lutheran Church in person and ultimately join us as we connect people to life in Jesus.
Well, good morning. It's great to be with you today. I'm Pastor Dan. If we haven't met before, I'm on the teaching rotation here at Brookfield Lutheran and also director of a ministry that does leadership empowering work in our urban spaces. Today we're jumping into Nehemiah. We're in chapter 4 as a congregation walking through the book of Nehemiah as it's great fuel and clarity around this whole process that we're in as a congregation and this strategic planning season that we're in as a church. It's really fascinating to look at the book of Nehemiah, at Nehemiah's leadership, the experience of the people of God at that time as they were sort of really galvanizing themselves around the work that God had for them, what they experienced in that process. And it informs us as we continue to walk forward as a congregation, what is it that can shape this as a really thriving season of ministry as a congregation as God does his things and we lean into it together. So some quick context for Nehemiah, if you're not familiar with this book. The historical context of this book lands near the end of the Old Testament time frame chronologically. It doesn't land there in the books of the Bible, but it's near the end of the Old Testament history where Nehemiah was an official serving a king who was king of the Persian Empire at the time. After the Babylonian Empire, which was taken over by the Persian Empire, but after the Babylonian Empire came and took over, defeated Jerusalem and Judah, and as part of their conquest of taking over Jerusalem and Judah, they would take people from the city in the area and disperse them all over the place. It was a way for one nation to diffuse the manpower, the collective coming together in revolution power that's there, and diffusing it by dispersing people from that city and that nation all over the known world. That's what comes to be known as the diaspora or the dispersion of the Jewish people. Super random connection then when you get to the New Testament and you get to the book of Acts and you see Paul and Peter traveling all over the known world and finding pockets of Jewish believers who were waiting for the Messiah. You ask the question, well, how did they get there? The reason they got there is from this dispersion that happened, sent all over the place, and that what Satan meant for evil, God means for good, as he plants seeds for new churches all over the known world at the time, generations later. Just interesting side note. Nehemiah in this time is working in the government officials, sort of his court, and has on his heart a desire to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the walls, rebuild the city. The city had been destroyed. When Babylonia took over, they destroyed all the walls and burned all the gates. And so it was just an exposed building. The temple was destroyed. The whole thing is in shambles. Nehemiah has a desire to go back. And it's not just out of nostalgia. I think sometimes our hearts are rooted in nostalgic things more than they are in God things. When Nehemiah was called and had a calling in his heart to go back and rebuild Jerusalem, it wasn't just for nostalgia's sake, like that was my home church, that was my hometown. But no, rather he recognizes what Jerusalem signifies in the world at that time. God had said, in this temple, I will put my dwelling, and in this city of Jerusalem, this place on Mount Zion will be a beacon for the world to experience the presence of God in this world as it ripples out from this location. This is also connected to the mission motive that God gives to the New Testament church. You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and the ends of the earth. It's the same mission approach that God has as he begins the New Testament movement of salvation in Jesus, as he had in the Old Testament, that God's presence started in Jerusalem and it rippled its way out into the world. And so Nehemiah has in mind more than just the nostalgic connection to his home church or his hometown. Nehemiah recognizes that the very presence of God in this world begins in Jerusalem, begins in Mount Zion. And while its walls are broken and the gates are burned and there is nothing rippling out from Jerusalem, the world risks experiencing the presence of God. So it's more than just a building for him. It's more than bricks and it's more than wood. It's a spiritual movement of God that he wants to make sure is unhindered, and the community and the world in which he lives can continue to experience God's work in God's ways. For Nehemiah, that means we need to reestablish Jerusalem. And so he has a calling and he has favor with the king to go do it. He even gets permission to go and use resources, all these kind of things. And so in our lesson today, then, we're starting in chapter 4 in Nehemiah. We're going to read and then talk and then read and then talk. We'll go through the text that way. I want you to keep in mind, so there's the big biblical overview of Nehemiah's heart and context. We sit in the same space as a church. God's desire to build a church, and let's make it very specific, God's desire to build Brookfield Lutheran Church is not for nostalgia's sake. It's not about bricks and wood framing. It's about a community experience the eternal presence of God that starts in a place and ripples its way out into the community. Our story, our purpose, our reason for existence is the same as what God was doing through Jerusalem. That there is a presence of God that is meant to have an impact in the space around it. And so God's desire for any church and Brookfield Lutheran Church is that we are who we are and we do what we do so that the presence of God can ripple out into the world around us. And in that journey, and in that process, and in that sort of wrestling out, what does that mean for us as a family of faith together, we experience certain things. And today, we're going to talk about what it means when the going gets tough, when there's opposition to that work, whether that's outside or inside or whatever it may be. So chapter 4, verses 1 through 6, we'll, like I said, read some, talk some, read some, talk some here. Chapter 4, verse 1. Now when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. And he said in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish it up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heap of rubbish and the burnt ones at that?" Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, "Yes, what are they building? If a fox goes up on it, he'll break down their stone wall. Hear," now this is Nehemiah's prayer, "hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captive." Essentially, do to them the same thing that happened to us. "Do not cover their guilt and do not let their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders." So we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. We'll pause there for a second. You ever notice, I don't know if this is true for you. It's often true for me and my wife. It's not always true, but it's often true that when we're following the Lord in something and we're unsure if we're on the right path or not, one of the litmus tests for us is how much opposition there is to this idea from the world around us. How many obstacles we run into, how many challenges, how many cars start breaking down, how many this starts happening, how much, all of a sudden, so the world starts wreaking havoc around us, and we're seasoned enough in our walk of life and faith to know a little flag goes up in our head and we think, boy, we must be onto something right, because there's a lot of opposition that's coming from weird places against what God's calling us to do. A lot of distraction, a lot of opposition. But you also notice that opposition that comes from the outside has a way of galvanizing you in your mission. It has a way of solidifying, no, that ain't happening, right? God is up to something here, and I'm not going to let the enemy overcome. It does that even in a body of believers. What better way to make an enemy a friend than to have a common other enemy, if that makes sense? I remember growing up in our neighborhood as a young boy up in West Bend, and I had a neighbor who was kind of annoying. He wasn't really a friend, but we both had the same enemy. 2 houses down, there were like older boys who would actively torment you as you tried to ride your bike down the alley. And so me and this other neighbor who was a little bit annoying, I wouldn't really call him a friend, we were thick as thieves anytime we wanted to get down the alley to go play at somebody else's house. Like, we were together because we had a common enemy. There's something about the church too, as we live out our faith together and the world is in opposition to it. When that opposition is outside of us, it has a way of galvanizing together the body and its mission. You notice this in third world countries or places where mission work is extremely hard. Have a friend who does the same thing I do in Milwaukee, but he does it in Houston. Before he moved to Houston, he was a missionary in the Middle East, sharing Jesus with Muslims. And he talks about if he found one believer, didn't matter what denomination they came from, didn't matter what their story was, if they believed in Jesus, they were thick, they were connected, they were on the same team. Because it was them against the darkness. And that's really the reality of this, is that we live in a world that is controlled and manipulated by the evil one, the enemy. And he has control right now in a lot of ways. He has influence. There are 2 characters, 2 antagonists that showed up in our story. One is Sanballat, one is Tobiah. They're local regional leaders. They're pagan worshipers. They're enemies of God, but they have influence in the region. They get to call the shots in the region, and they know that if Jerusalem gets reestablished, their influence diminishes. Their power is limited, and they're not the only ones who have influence now in that space. They recognize the power of God that happens when God's people are united and his city is secure. They don't want that to happen, so Tobiah and Sanballat are doing everything they can to create opposition to the work of God within the people of God. We are battling the same dark enemy. He holds the heart and the minds of people in darkness. He has on our world this veil that keeps people from recognizing and receiving Jesus as the healer of their heart and their soul and the salvation of their lives. He has influence, and he doesn't want any of it to be thwarted or diminished. And so the opposition that he will create in the world against a body of believers who are trying to do God's will is real, and it's often insurmountable, it feels like at times. We push forward and all of a sudden something happens in the world that makes it feel like this is a battle we can't win. But in this moment, we see what this kind of opposition does for the people of God and what it does in Nehemiah's leadership. He brings the people of God together. And it says, verse 6, so we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. So this opposition that comes galvanizes the people. Half of the wall gets built, which means half of the height all the way around the city, because the people recognize that we have a common enemy. And so we're going to lean in together. And so I would pray and hope that this congregation, this church, the BLC family would come together in a common heart to build something that can change our community, because we are fighting a common enemy. That's the evil one who wants to hold captive people in our families and in our neighborhoods and in our community. So we have a common enemy. So let's be galvanized together around the work that God has given us to do. Let's go into verse 7 through 14 now. You have opposition that comes from the outside, a world that doesn't understand the kingdom of God and wants it at all costs to stop it. But then you also have opposition from the inside, starting at verse 7. But when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls in Jerusalem was going forward and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. Interesting. And we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. In Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves we will not be able to rebuild the wall. And our enemies said, they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. You notice what the enemy says. When the enemy says, see, they're distracted. They're disheartened. And now they're vulnerable and we can attack. Verse 12, at that time the Jews who lived near them came from all directions. So those who weren't in Jerusalem doing the work were coming from other neighboring communities to Jerusalem, and they're saying, 10 times you must return to us, meaning give up the work. It's too much. There's too much to do. You can't do it. Just come home. Just leave it be and return to your homes, is what the message was internally. So in the lowest parts of the space between the wall, in open spaces, I stationed the people with their clans, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and aroused and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. So it's one thing to receive opposition from outside, because that often galvanizes us and we realize we're onto something here and we're going to press in. It's another thing when opposition happens from the inside. When people who are supposed to be leaning in together in the same direction begin to cause doubt and dissension, and they start biting at each other and fighting against each other rather than fighting against the real enemy. And to be honest, this dynamic in a church body where people start turning in on each other is the number one reason that people in this generation are walking away from church more than any other time in history, because they see the hypocrisy in it. You say one thing, but then internally you are living something different. And it's opposition from the outside is challenging. Opposition from the inside is like a plague. It's like a disease. It's hard to fix. It's hard to get out. And the reason it exists most often is because we have so much comfort and space. Now, take my friend's example, who was a missionary in the Middle Eastern part of the world, evangelizing Muslims, where he was a mass minority in faith. Now he lives in Houston and is part of a church, and he cannot for the life of himself figure out why people are arguing amongst each other. Well, it's because in America, one of the challenges of having a church in America is that we have a lot of comfort and freedom and cushion. We don't get persecuted for sharing our faith in the same way you would in the Middle East. And so we have more space to disagree with each other about the color of the carpet or the style of music or the decibel level of the speaker system or the problem with ProPresenter that won't get off the screen every 60 seconds, right? We have so much space and margin and comfort to exercise our faith. We've got all sorts of room to turn in on each other because guess what? When we start looking for faults in anybody, you're going to find them. What is Nehemiah's response to that? All of a sudden, the people of God are losing heart. They're being discouraged. Now they're starting to question one to another, is the work even possible? Should we be doing this? Is it worth it? What is Nehemiah's response? His response at the end of verse 14, he calls when he says, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome. And fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your homes. Nehemiah calls them to put their gaze back on the Lord. What happens to create internal discord and disagreement with one another is that we take our gaze collectively off of the Lord and his mission, and we start looking at ourselves and one another. And when we begin doing that, we see all of the flaws and the mistakes, and we turn those into the main event. But when we keep our eyes focused on the Lord and his mission, there will be flaws and things that need to be improved in the body and in the function and the systems of an organization. That stuff is all good and right to make sure that it's running well and things are good and the carpet's the right color and the volume's the right level and the AV stuff works. Like, that's all good to do, but when that becomes the main focus, we lose the Lord and his mission. But when we focus on the Lord and his mission, it allows us to all move in the same direction together and recognize that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. See, the reality of this space is that all the strategic planning, we're talking about doing some building renovation and all the stuff that strategic planning takes for a congregation. The reality of all of that I hope you all understand, is that all of the money and the time and the planning and all this investment, it's for you, but it's not for you. You'll receive the benefit of an enhanced worship experience. You'll receive the benefit of education space and ministry space. You'll receive the benefit of it, but ultimately it's not for you. It's for the world outside of these doors who need to experience what you have. When our eyes stay focused on the Lord and his mission, then all of the support stuff, the building, the space, the sound, the AV, all the stuff that happens inside of Jerusalem or inside of our space, it is all in the right place, leveraging for the right reasons for all the people who don't yet know Jesus. Will you benefit? Yeah, but not as much as someone who goes from dark to light. Will you receive some joy and benefit from some of the stuff that, yes, but not as much as someone whose family is falling apart today, but because of the work of BLC is reconciled in 2 years. Let's be a congregation that recognizes that all of this is not about us. It's about the Lord and his mission and those who don't yet know him. So let's move on. Verse 15, when our enemies had heard that it was known to us, their plan to confuse and distract, when it was known to us that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. From that day on, half of my servants worked on construction and half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other. And each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built. The man who sounded the trumpet was beside me. And I said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread, and we're separated on the wall far from one another. In the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So you notice now, after they've come through these two different experiences, opposition from the outside, Sanballat, Tobiah, wanting to thwart the plans because they would lose influence in the world, in that space. And then all of a sudden, creating confusion inside where now there's this turmoil within the body of believers about whether we should be doing this or not. When Nehemiah is able now to help everyone see the Lord and his mission, you can see how all of a sudden now they begin leaning in and breakthrough happens. And this is the reality of joining the Lord in his work. Do you notice how Nehemiah is encouraging people to gather? So the reality of it is different families are working on different sections of the wall all around the entire city of Jerusalem. So if an attack happens on the east side of the Jerusalem and there are people on the west side of Jerusalem, they're not going to know that the attack is happening. So they have a trumpeter who will blow the horn and everyone will rally to that place. But you notice what his instructions were. Verse 20, in the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. Again, Nehemiah is helping his brothers and sisters know without a shadow of a doubt that victory is the Lord's. Without a shadow of a doubt that it's not them rallying to the wall that gives victory. It's not them outnumbering the enemy that gives victory. It's not them having better swords and being better prepared that gives them the victory. The victory is the Lord's, and it's going to happen in the Lord's way, in the Lord's will, in the Lord's strength. And he's inviting the people of God to join God in his victory, so his victory is also their victory. That's when breakthrough happens. When we keep our eyes on the Lord and his mission, when he makes breakthrough happen, that victory that happens, whether it's within our body or outside in this world, when breakthrough happens, when a life is transformed from darkness to light, when a community is transformed from confusion to love and service, when breakthrough happens in this world, it is the Lord's doing and the Lord's victory, but it is ours as we join him there as well. We can see how this is fulfilled in the life of Jesus. You can see how it plays out in the whole New Testament church and even today. If you look at the life of Jesus, Jesus went to the cross. He suffered sin, pain, death. He suffered the consequences of all those things, and he had victory over it. Jesus, had victory over it, but so do we. When we put our faith and our trust in his work, in his victory, then his victory also becomes our victory. It's his work that accomplishes it, but it becomes our victory when we trust and we put our faith in him. When Jesus walked out of the grave, he defeated death forever, an eternal victory that can never be undone. That is Jesus's victory, but it becomes ours as well when we have faith and trust in him. Think of it this way. When the Lord calls a trumpet, the invitation we have is to join him where he has breakthrough so that we might join in the victory. In the empty tomb, there's a trumpet that blows, right? Not literally, but there's a trumpet that blows, a victory horn, a shofar that proclaims a victory of the Lord over death and hell itself. And those who are called follow that horn and join God in his victory in the resurrected Christ. That's true eternally, spiritually for all of us. But it's also true as we live this out together on this side of heaven. Think about it this way, strategic planning. How are we going to spend money to improve a building? How are we going to spend money to change our programming? How do we spend money and make plans around new mission ventures and language and values and mission statements? All that kind of stuff. That's all preparing us to be in the right posture to join Jesus in the place where breakthrough is about to happen and he blows the horn. We want to be the kind of church that's in the right place, leveraging who we are and what we have to join Jesus at the wall where the battle is happening. We don't want to be caught on the sidelines like, well, we don't know what to do about it. We know God's up to something here, but we're not organized enough. We're not postured in the right place. We're too worried about, sound and carpets and all that garbage to join Jesus when breakthrough's about to happen. Strategic planning as a congregation is helping us as a church posture ourselves to be mission ready when the horn blows to join God in that place of breakthrough where BLC is able to be part of the victory of God as he creates new life in this space. That's why this isn't all about us. All the stuff we do is for all the people who have not experienced God's transformative work yet. We want to be ready as a church, to be ready to move and join when the trumpet calls. Jesus, you're doing something. There's victory to be found, and we want to join you there. So we want to be a kind of church that postures itself in a way that we can be aligned with your work and your mission. When you blow the trumpet, we want to be ready. And then finally, verses 21 to the end. So we labored at the work, and half of them held the spears from the break of dawn until the stars came out. I also said to the people at that time, let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be a guard for us by night and may labor by day. So neither I nor my brothers nor my servants nor the men of guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. So now for Nehemiah, this wasn't just a project anymore. This was a posture. It's a lifestyle. The way it talks about it here is that it was like day and night. He was eating, breathing, sleeping this. He never took the sword off. Even one of the translations, a more literal Greek translation is, you didn't put your sword down to take a drink. This was now beyond just a project or a program. For Nehemiah, this was a posture of life. That we are ready to join. We are following the Lord and we are ready to join in his work whenever it happens. And as a church, this becomes the posture in which we operate. That this isn't just, like, let's say, a capital campaign. This isn't just a building space. This isn't just programs. This isn't just stuff that we put on paper and we make great plans around or we staff around and, call it good. The whole idea of being the church in the world is to have a posture that's joining Jesus on his mission. That we, in every way, shape, and form, are leveraging everything we have, even the seat that you're sitting on today. How can that seat be used to help someone else experience the gospel of Jesus Christ? It's more than a time, a worship time, a program, and it's beyond any one thing. It is a posture, it is a lifestyle of a church to be not only on the receiving end of the work of God, but also on the joining end of the work of God, so that everything that is at our disposal can be used to leverage together for the work of the kingdom of God that has an eternal consequence. Even the chair you're sitting on. For Nehemiah, it's not just a program. It's not just a Sunday morning. It's not just a building. It's not just a membership. It's a lifestyle. It's a posture of worship and service to God. So each of us personally then lives out that same posture, right? When we go home, we don't put our sword down here and then go home and we're doing something else. We want to carry who we are here into our families and into our workplaces and into our communities so that people can experience the true presence of God in their midst. Through faulty, frail people, but still the Holy Spirit doing his work even through people who make mistakes. We want all of us as a church collectively and individually to see this calling as a lifestyle. It's who we are. Ready, willing to step up and to step in wherever God is at work.